everyone, it's your boy Gsluke here for our DFS core picks at this week's RBC Heritage. We're right off the Masters, which for me on the DFS side was not one of my better weeks. We got burned by the Brooks Koepka and John Rahm chalk. Two people I expected to really come through for us and they didn't, but over on prize picks we ended up hitting for a ton of value, over 25 units gained over the weekend, so more than made up for it there. And in DFS still ended up being just slightly a negative, right? Ended up losing just 7% on our entry, so really wasn't all that bad. Even though we didn't have Scotty Scheffler, ended up missing on those two core picks. Ended up having a lot of the guys up top, like a Rory, who we took as a sleeper. Colin Morikawa, same type of thing, another sleeper pick for us. Charles Schwartzel had a really solid week and really made up for it there. So it wasn't the worst of weeks, but certainly wasn't our best. A lot of room for improvement, and if we're just treading water on our weeks where we don't have our best stuff, I'll more than take that, because when we're able to execute, hit on some of these core picks, give ourselves a few more outs in these large field tournaments, that's when you can bring home that magic and potentially take home one of these large field tournaments. So I'm excited with where things are trending, and for this week specifically, a little bit more of a unique venue. Of course, I already did my course breakdown video, so make sure to check that out if you haven't seen it already, but more of a plotter's course, not really that bomb and gouge type of affair. With so many golf casuals in the player pools now, you know, they got their taste of golf there at the Masters. I would expect a lot of them to carry over those entries here for this week, so could be a huge week for some ROI, and certainly one that I'm looking to take advantage of. In this video, we'll be covering my top 6 plays for GPP contests this weekend, so plays that I'll be using in my large field 150 max type of tournaments to go and try and get leverage onto the field. Last week, we had 30 of our 150 get 66 through the cut. If we hit on these core picks, last week we had 2 of them actually miss the cut. We could be seeing closer to a 50 or even 60% made cut rate, and those are the weeks you can really take home the big bucks. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into it. Alright, on the screen you can see our projections for this week, and I'll remind you, you can find these on my Patreon page. They're constantly updating as I'm changing my modeling. Ownership will be added, my player pool, so if you're looking to access these, to use them for your lineup making process, make sure to go ahead and check that out. Just $8 for the month. By far the best value you're going to find around the industry. Also, before we start, make sure you smash that like button. It goes a long way with getting the video out to even more people and shows support for me on the channel, which I appreciate a whole ton. But starting off with our first pick, our spend up option is going to be Dustin Johnson at $10,500. And while the key stats might not point to him being a great course fit from the surface, I mean, you can see we're looking at approach play more than anything here, but more of the short game stats, right? Shots gained, putting, driving accuracy, shots gained around the green. But if you take a look at his shots gained profile over the last 24 measured rounds, GG's been relatively well-rounded. He's gaining off the tee, as you would expect. Again, a bomber by nature, but gaining on approach, also gaining with the putter. And the one thing you can get away with at Harbour Town is going to be around the green play. These greens don't have much undulation. They're also only going to be running at 11.5 on the stint meter, which means even the worst around the green players are going to get away with it a bit. Along with the around the green play, the putting isn't all that difficult either. So for Dustin Johnson, somebody that can lean into that ball striking, of course, is somebody that intrigues me, particularly when I take a look at his 10K range, and I say he's going to be by far the lowest owned option. Somebody like Cameron Smith, of course, coming off that Players Championship, I would expect him to be chalky even with that Sunday meltdown. Justin Thomas looks like a world beater at this point, just hasn't been able to close a golf tournament. I'll be on him this week, but he'll be real chalky. And even Colin Morikawa, who this is a perfect course fit for. You can see he's in my player pool. Absolutely love him this week. DJ's kind of that lost man out, you know, that guy people are forgetting about. And really, the approach play and just the course history and the recent form has been there. So let's start with the course history. At the top of the board has been extremely consistent. He finished 13th year last year, 17th the year before that. Has finished top 28 in all 4 starts over the last 4 years. So has consistently been putting up finishes at this event. Of course, hasn't finished in the top 10. So that might be slightly concerning for somebody in this $10,500 range. But what really excites me here is going to be the recent form, where he finished 12th at the Masters. Of course, was in a better position to start Saturday and kind of fell apart there on Saturday, so that wasn't so much a plus. But 4th place at the match play, of course, that historically had been a decent event for him, so good to see him have some success there. Made the cut at Valspar, 9th place at the Players Championship, also a few more made cuts before that. He he's starting to look like the DJ of old, which is somebody who's going to gain in at least 3 of the 4 major statistical categories. And at a golf course where you can get away with not being the best around the green. I mean, when DJ's doing his best stuff, he's not missing many greens to begin with. That really intrigues me. So I think he's just being a little bit slept on here. He's not my favorite play in terms of projection. You can see that would actually be Justin Thomas or even a Cameron Smith. But in terms of upside, with the ownership I'm expecting to come in on a DJ, somebody I'm expecting to come in that 10 to 12% range. And if I get just 20, maybe even 25% ownership to DJ, that should be enough to leverage the field though. So definitely like the play. I think he's a high upside play, especially with some of the recent form that we've seen. And if we zoom out on him, just take a look at the last 50 measured rounds. You can see the putting gets a little bit better. It's closer to half a stroke gain per round. Still gaining significantly off the tee on approach, albeit a little bit less, right? It's a little bit more modest in both those categories. But nice to see that the ball striking is starting to get sharper. It's starting to get closer to half a stroke gain per round, which when he was world number 1, when he was winning all of those events there about a year and a half ago, he was gaining close to half a stroke per round because he is so solid with the putter. So I'm expecting big things from DJ. This could perhaps be that bounce back win that we've been waiting for from the big guy. Next up, I have Daniel Berger as my second man in here at $9,600. Last week, didn't do anything special, right? Was kind of under the radar. At one point was in the top 10 of the event. Ended up finishing, wrong tab here. Ended up finishing at 50th place, so did fall apart over the weekend at the match play. Didn't really do all that much, but 13th at the Players at the Honda Classic, was winning through 3 rounds. That was the last time you really saw him in contention. You know, after that has kind of been going under the radar. A few made cuts. I mean, the 13th at the Players is pretty solid, but never really had his nose up there in the top 5. So he's kind of being slept on. And with the shots gained metrics, you can see why. He's been a little bit inconsistent. He's gaining across the board well, just a slight negative with the approach play there, but gaining off the tee, gaining on approach, around the green, also gaining with the putter, which you would expect for a DB. You would expect him to be extremely consistent, but of late, especially at the match play, he bled strokes on approach. And I think that's why people's modeling is getting a little bit thrown off. Of course, depending on where you're getting your statistics, the PGA Tour does put out shots gained metrics for the approach stats, and it's muddling a lot of people's numbers, and including myself, right? I have a lot of those numbers included in here, and I'm willing to kind of forgive DB for that. We know this is somebody who's extremely accurate off the tee. When you need somebody just to get it out there in the fairway, he's going to be much better than most, particularly because he has right around a 73% fairway percentage rate. A lot of the other guys in this range, I mean, outside of a Matt Fitzpatrick, going to be closer to that 62 to 64% range because they're more bomb and gouge players. He's also a really solid approach player. I mean, if you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, which is a much better sample size for DB, you can see he's gaining nearly 0.6 of a stroke per round on approach, gaining with the off the tee play, which he's never going to be an elite off the tee player, but at this golf course specifically, that is non-issue. He's gaining around the green. The putter does go to a negative, so he's not necessarily the most consistent player on that surface, but he has gained with the putter of late. Historically for his career, he is a significant gainer on POA Anua, which is going to be the surface this week. We do have Bermuda grass typically at this event, but with all the weather, the Bermuda grass is dormant, and the GSCAA did tell us it is going to be a POA Tribulus overseed this week. So those are the stats that I'm pulling for putting, so he looks good in that category. The putting of late has been pretty solid, so if he can return to that ball striking acumen where he's going to gain in all 3 of those tee to green categories, I'm expecting a ton from Daniel Berger this week, potentially even a win. So I have my eye on the outright number. I'm kind of waiting for it to get a little bit more inflated for me to go ahead and hit it, because I think he's just going so under the radar that people might not think about betting or playing him in DFS this week. So much like a DJ, might be an under the radar guy to keep an eye on. Next up, we're going to talk about our bread and butter play, which is going to be Tyrrell Hatton at $8,600. He's much like a Daniel Berger, not the best off the tee player, right? He's going to be a loser over time, or maybe right around a neutral player, but very significant gainer with the approach play. And the short game for Tyrrell Hatton is also solid. So if we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, just get an idea of how he's played of late, you can see right around neutral with the off the tee, which, like I said, is what we would expect, but gaining with the approach play, usually a little bit better with the approach play. So that is slightly concerning, but the putter has been an absolute magic broomstick. He's been gaining a ton of strokes with the flat stick, gaining over half a stroke per round. If we give him a larger sample size, try to get a better idea of how he looked long term, the off the tee play does go into the negative. I told you that would happen, but the approach play is still there, around the green play is there, and still gaining significantly with the putter. So with the key stats I'm looking at, he checks the box with driving accuracy, checks the putting box emphatically. Around the green play is there for Tyrrell Hatton. It's just all about the off the tee play. And the one thing you can see is that distance off the tee is not an issue. So if that's going to be the one thing that holds him back at most golf courses, and that's not going to be a factor this week at Harbour Town, I'm going to be all over the guy, because on the European Tour, he showed an acumen for winning. This is somebody who, when he gets his nose up there in contention, he's a hard guy to shake off. He's got that fiery attitude. I think he's going a little bit under the radar, perhaps because of the recent form. He did end up making the cut there at the Masters, but had a horrible weekend, completely fell apart, and ended up finishing in 52nd place, but had a top 10 at the match play, is a 21st at the Valspar, 13th at the Players, 2nd at the API. So, of course, Hatton has looked really solid of late, but if you just look at his last performance, right, it looked a little bit dreadful. I'm willing to forgive him for that at the Masters, particularly with some of the weird conditions that we had there on Saturday. It was extremely windy, also a little bit cold over there in Augusta, so played a little bit differently than most years for sure. Next up, we have our value pick, who are going to be going with Kevin Na here at $7,800, and this really should just be a Kevin Na track. If you think about the skill set that succeeds here, don't need the off the tee play, you just got to have good irons, got to be a really solid putter. He checks both of those boxes to an elite degree. So let's go ahead and look at the shots gained, which for Kevin Na hasn't been all that elite of late. In fact, he's in one of the worst stretches of his career. Hasn't had a win for over 12 months. Losing off the tee like you would expect, but gaining significantly on approach. That is always good to see, particularly if he's not playing his best golf, but still gaining over half a stroke per round. The putting is a negative, and that's really the issue with Na. If he's not gaining strokes on the greens, he's not going to have a chance. He's a short game specialist by nature. But if you take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, it does get at least a little bit more encouraging, right? The putter does go to a positive, gaining right around a quarter of a stroke per round, still gaining significantly on approach and also around the green. And if off the tee isn't going to matter this week, particularly a lack of distance off the tee, he's doing everything we need him to, right? Gaining in the other three major statistical categories. He's somebody who, of course, has enough experience at this course to be able to get it done. And the course history has been a little bit up and down for Na. You can see the last time out, he did miss the cut. Did have a 10th place finish in 2019, though. Another missed cut in 2018, along with a 39th place finish in 2017. So the course history has been volatile. That is why I think his ownership will be a little bit lower than it should be. And somebody who, if he's going to come in at, let's say, 13, maybe 14% ownership, I'd be willing to take 25 or even 30% in my player pool. I just expect this to be a really good course fit. I think the recent form might be a little bit underrated, particularly because even in this stretch of golf, he's still gaining over half a stroke on approach per round. And that is by far the biggest stat that I'm looking at for this week. Next up, we have Kevin Streelman at $7,500. He's going to be our flyer pick for this week. A little bit more expensive than most flyer picks, but absolutely love the play. Had to fit it into a player pool here because he checks every box I'm looking at. So first off, the course history. Unlike a Kevin Na, he's been extremely consistent here, and is one of the few people in this range you can say that about. 33rd, the one missed cut, but a 6th and a 7th place finish. The recent form has also been excellent for him, so if we go down here for Kevin Streelman, you can see he had an 18th at Valero, 7th at Valspar, also 22nd at the Players Championship, so 3 top 25s in a row. Missed cut at the API, we can give him a little bit of a pass for. That was a very difficult test there. And over the last 24 measured rounds, you can see the shots gained also backs it up. He's gaining off the tee, which is mostly with his accuracy. He's not the longest player on tour, but certainly can do it with accuracy from time to time, gaining around the green and gaining with the putter. And for Streelman, the one thing we can usually count on from him is solid iron play, solid approach play. So for him to be losing on approach over the last 24 measured rounds is a little bit surprising. And if we take a little bit of a zoom out on it, you can see he's still losing with the approach play, which is concerning there. Obviously, something with the swing has gone awry. If he turns that around, though, he looks like he's in a beautiful position to succeed. And based on the last few performances, obviously he's turning something around. I mean, if we go over here to the recent form, 18th, 7th, 22nd, you can't finish that highly if the approach play isn't at least adequate. So if he's trending in the right direction, I want to be early on Kevin Streelman. And despite having these solid finishes of late, he has yet to be chalky. He's been at the highest right around 12% owned. So at $7,500 at a fair price tag, you might see 13, maybe 15% ownership this week because of some of the recent performances. And that would still be somebody I'd be willing to get leverage on just because he checks every box that I'm looking for. And now lastly, our true diamond in the rough pick, our guy down low at $6,800 that is going to give you some salary flexibility, but still somebody I think has a perfect skill set for this golf course is going to be Lanto Griffin. So it's a little bit of a sneaky pick here, but particularly if you take a look at his last 24 measured rounds, you'll see exactly why I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel for Lanto, who has been struggling. He hasn't made many cuts of late, but the one shots gained category that he's holding on to right now is the shots gained approach. And one thing for Lanto is that when he's playing his best golf, he's going to be a near gainer in every category. So if we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, which are much more favorable for somebody like a Lanto Griffin, you can see he's gaining on approach still. The off the tee play is much closer to neutral. He's gaining with the putter, and the around the green play is also just a slight negative. And if there's one category he does lose on historically, it will be around the green. And at this golf course specifically, you can get away with that. Again, they run around 11 or 11.5 on the stint meter. They don't have much undulation to them, the greens here, that is. And for Lanto Griffin, somebody who's historically a great ball striker, I just feel like he's underpriced for this field. It's a relatively strong field up top, but once we get past the $8,000 range, it doesn't necessarily have all these big names in it. So at $6,800, especially when we compare the names around him, just somebody I think is a little bit underpriced. And if we take a look at his long-term pedigree, what he's done here over the years, he's definitely somebody who should be priced maybe closer to $7,500. So I do think you're getting a lot of inherent value. And because of the recent play, I also don't think he's very highly owned. You could see him maybe in that 5 to 7% owned range, where it would be extremely easy to get leverage at right around 15 or maybe even 20% ownership if he wanted to be a little bit more aggressive about it. But in either circumstance, certainly somebody I'm considering for my lineups this week, and somebody I'll be mixing in to quite a few of my lineups. Alright guys, that's all I've got for this week's core picks. Before we go on and get out of here, let me know down in the comments who you have winning this week's event. For me, I'm going to have to take Daniel Berger. I just really like the outright number on him and have a weird feeling he pulls through this week. But obviously, really like DJ. I would consider taking Morikawa or JT as well. But go ahead and let me know your favorite pick down below. And as always, expect even more DFS content to come throughout the week. We will have our value pick video coming out tomorrow morning. I'd assume right around 10 a.m. Eastern time. So look forward to that tomorrow morning. We're also going to have Fades and Sleepers, our weekly DFS live stream, a price picks video at some point as well. So got you covered from all different standpoints for this event. Really looking forward to all of our contests. Best of luck whether you're playing DFS, placing outrights, whatever market you're going to be in, and let's get this cash.